listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96, and this is Norman Richmond along with Mali Docuvixen, and we are joined now by Dr. Gerald Horne. Dr. Horne holds the Rebecca and John J. Moore's Chair of African American Studies of African and African American Studies at the University of Houston, and we are ready to rumble. And Dr. Horne, how are you doing today?
Oh, I am fine. Well, let me first of all say I have an announcement to make about Zimbabwe. Just a few days ago, the Biden administration made a pivot on the sanctions question. They removed, if not eroded, nationwide sanctions against the economy and then tightened them against the leadership. But I think that the progressive community is interpreting this as a climb down by the imperialist countries and a victory for Zimbabwe and a victory for Africa. And I think it's a response to a changing global climate whereby, as a result of sanctions against Zimbabwe, they moved closer to China, they moved closer to Russia, they even moved closer to Belarus, whose leader, Lukashenko, had visited Zimbabwe and had entertained Zimbabweans in return visits in Eastern Europe. And we all know that Zimbabwe is a storehouse of natural resources and minerals, including chrome, including, if I'm not mistaken, platinum as well, and other resources essential for the green economy. And you cannot separate this climb down on Zimbabwe from the rather troubled imperialist relationship with South Africa. South Africa is being threatened by sanctions because it had the audacity to take Israel to the International Court of Justice because of genocide in Gaza. And also, this has unleashed a complementary effort to target London and Washington as aiders and abettors of genocide. Indeed, the Democratic Party of Mr. Biden in Washington is now reviewing relations with Pretoria. And just as we saw the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, visit Angola just weeks ago, despite troubled relations with Angola in recent years and decades, the attempt to improve relations with Angola is also in part to try to develop further leverage against South Africa. Now, Zimbabwe and South Africa have not had necessarily a smooth relationship. Recall that when the now disgraced President Jacob Zuma came into office, he was threatening to sign on to an invasion of Zimbabwe, interestingly enough. And I think that that's one of the measures that helped to gain him support in the North Atlantic community and probably in South Africa itself. And as well, there has even been talk about Zimbabwe joining the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, this alternative formation to the US-led group of seven that is the United States, the Western European nations, plus Japan. And even if that does not happen, I think that the bottom line is that what we have seen in the past few days is a significant step in favor of African liberation against neo-colonialism. And I do think it's also a reprimand and rebuke to some of our friends here in North America who endorse sanctions against Zimbabwe on the spurious grounds of Zimbabwe being a serial violator of human rights, even though we know that Zimbabwe's neighbors, including Swaziland, have a much worse human rights record than Zimbabwe. We all know that the reason sanctions were placed on Zimbabwe and not, for example, Swaziland, was because Zimbabwe took measures to reclaim the land stolen illicitly by European settlers And any maneuver against settler colonialism anywhere in the world, see Israel, historic Palestine, as a reference point, Washington gets upset. It gets concerned. And that's why sanctions were slapped on Zimbabwe. And so this climb down is very significant. It's a victory. And I think that it also reflects, to a certain degree, the steadfastness of the progressive community, which refused to bow to propaganda and stood by Zimbabwe during its time of need.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Horne. What do you think? How do you think Al Sharpton, and Hakeem Jeffries are going to respond to this? And what Hakeem Jeffries? I know he would be probably even to the right of Jeffries on that particular question on Zimbabwe. How do you think they're going to respond?
I assume they'll follow the White House. I mean, I don't see why they should try to get to the right of the White House. That wouldn't make any sense. I think that they'll probably give you some double talk if you ask them. But what they should do is listen to what we're saying, which is that U.S. imperialism has to make severe adjustments in light of its deteriorating geopolitical position. And I dare say you're going to see other maneuvers similar to this climb down on Zimbabwe, particularly because the imperialist countries are losing altitude and they have to adjust accordingly.
Yeah, Zimbabwe, that was, Bob did the song in Zimbabwe, did the song on Zimbabwe. And one of the things that we saw the film last night, and one of the things that I was thinking about was when Walter Rodney was under house arrest, not necessarily under, he was under heavy manners in Guyana. He left. You know this already, but I'm telling this to the listeners. He slipped into Zimbabwe and actually met with Bob Marley in Zimbabwe. And Mugabe wanted Walter to stay and, work in Zimbabwe and, basically put the education piece together. But Walter chose to come back to Guyana and was murdered shortly after he came back.
Yes, I'm afraid that is accurate.
And go ahead, Melinda.
No, I said, I don't know. We haven't gotten your commentary around the anniversary of the 2004 coup and the current situation of the UN going into Haiti once again.
Well, the news from Haiti is troubling. We know that the so-called leader of that country, Ariel Henry, recently visited Kenya. There is a U.S.-backed plan to send Kenyan police officers to Haiti. The reports that we receive in the U.S. press is that organizations that are referred to as gangs are perhaps even on the verge of taking power. That's what we are told. And in any case, Mr. Henry, in seeking to return back to his home, has been stalled in Puerto Rico because apparently this opposition just referred to controls the airport. We understand that there are urgent consultations now being held by the neighbors, including Jamaica and the CARICOM nations. But once again, I dare say it's going to be difficult to craft a remedy or a proposal that's credible and viable for Haiti moving forward unless you can get more participation from the giant of the Caribbean, speaking of Cuba. But that runs into U.S. opposition, which, as with Zimbabwe, has had a long-term policy of putting the screws to Cuba, that is to say, a blockade, embargo, sanctions of all types. So if you ask me what the prognosis is for Haiti as we speak, I'm afraid I'm not able to provide one. There seems to be a standoff between the various forces. Hopefully, this CARICOM meeting just referenced will be able to craft some viable proposal that's acceptable to the stakeholders.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. We are speaking with Dr. Gerald Horne. Did you want to talk about, we want to hear your analysis of Trump and Biden. And after that, I think we wanted to go to the South African elections.
Well, you know that in the United States, we had these primaries, that is to say, the two major capitalist parties, the Democrats and Republicans, have this process whereby supporters choose candidates. And it appears that the two major candidates for the White House will be Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump, basically a replay of 2020, although it's apparent that a goodly number of US voters do not welcome that prospect. The polls suggest that Mr. Trump is ahead. I'm referring to a poll that appeared in the New York Times on March 3rd that received significant publicity. It also showed that Mr. Trump is ahead in key states such as Nevada, where apparently he's 7 points ahead. Mr. Biden is ahead by a narrow margin in Pennsylvania, where he was born, but his lead is within the margin of error, which means, or which suggests that the poll may be inaccurate. Mr. Trump continues to receive maximum support from the descendants of the settlers. I feel that we may be in the midst of a counter-revolutionary moment. You know that I was just in Hawaii working on the third volume of a trilogy. The first volume being the counter-revolution of 1776, the second volume being the counter-revolution of 1836 concerning Texas, and volume 3, the counter-revolution of 1893, the illicit takeover of the Hawaiian Islands by the imperialists. And as I pointed out on these airwaves just a few days ago, that takeover percolated from below by settlers, European settlers, who are still a minority in the archipelago, and then subsequently was endorsed by the political leadership. And that's part of the contradiction of settler colonialism, at least in the United States, is that it has not always come from the top down, that is to say, the political leadership down. It's come from local exploiters and entrepreneurs and land grabbers and land speculators and genocidaires. Speaking of the latter, one of the reasons why, as I've said, Hawaii was not subjected to genocide was because they had powerful allies with regard to Japan in the first instance. The plurality of the population of the islands to this very day are of Japanese ancestry. But in any case, this puts the lie to Mr. Trump's State of the Union address, where, as all presidents do, he will say the State of the Union is strong, because I feel that Hawaii will be leaving the Union before the end of the century. On the right-wing side of the ledger, there will be a referendum for Texas to leave the United States, I would say, within the next 18 months. And I'm not sure how that vote will turn out. You also have a similar movement in Alaska, believe it or not, according to the Daily Mail in London. In any case, once again, we're in the midst of this counter-revolutionary moment where the settlers are bent and determined on putting Mr. Trump back in the White House. A perverse bit of good news, perhaps, and I underline perhaps, is that if Mr. Trump returns to the White House, his immediate retribution and revenge will be taken on the Biden family, the Obamas, etc. And it may take him a while to get down the list to those on the left, such as myself, for example. That's a rather perverse bit of good news, because it may be bad news, because if he gains momentum in, for example, putting the Bidens in prison or otherwise crushing them, well, that'll give him momentum to go after people like me. So it's a very dicey situation in the United States of America. It's made even more problematic by the fact that we really don't have any sort of analysis with regard to why and how this is taking place in a political organization that I'm a part of. I asked, could someone provide an analysis of this moment? And nobody stepped forward. So there you have it.
Hi, you're listening to Diasporic music on Black Power 96. I think I inadvertently asked you a second question. I should have been one at a time, but I think I was asking about the South African elections.
Oh, yes. Once again, to return to South Africa, South Africa's profile in the international community and the international progressive communities has improved tremendously in light of their bringing Israel before the International Court of Justice. I think also that it's improved domestically as a result. Now, the imperialists would like to see the so-called Democratic Alliance, a neo-apartheid party, do well. They most likely would be disappointed. I think opposition to the ruling African National Congress will be expressed mostly through votes for the economic freedom fighters led by former African National Congress cadre Julius Malema. He places his organization to the left of the ANC with regard to land reform, for example, even trying to be more militant than the ANC with regard to Israel, which takes some doing, given the fact that, after all, it's the ANC that took Israel to the ICJ. But in any case, it's a very complicated situation for reasons already adduced. That is to say that South Africa has outraged the imperialist countries with this gambit concerning Israel. Once again, that led, in my estimation, to the imperialists trying to improve relations with both Zimbabwe and Angola to get leverage over South Africa. So we'll see what happens. But I think that the good news, is that the Democratic Alliance will not do very well. And there's another footnote I should add, which does not speak well for the White House. The Voice of America is the U.S. media arm, not unlike BBC. And it has a correspondent in South Africa, Darren Taylor, who is totally right-wing, hostile to any kind of progress. And in fact, he is also a correspondent for the Epoch Times, which is this right-wing anti-communist, anti-China rag that is distributed widely in the United States of America. And one has to question the judgment of the Biden Voice of America for having on the payroll this miscreant, Darren Taylor, who, of course, is a holdover from the Trump years.
Epoch Times, yeah, they used to push it up here quite a bit in Toronto, but I don't get around, as Duke Ellington would say, I don't get around much anymore, but it used to be all over the place. I know you can see it. Last time I was in LA, just before you walked into the big library downtown LA, you'd see maybe it would be on every corner. You can just pick it up from the box for free, right?
Yes. And in fact, when I've spent a lot of time in Washington, as you know, and I got used to reading it on a regular basis. And I've been reading it ever since on a regular basis because it's really hysterical and it's really wild. But on a more positive note, let me return to remarks you made about Walter Rodney and Bob Marley and the film on Bob Marley. And of course, you and Melinda can give us analysis of that film, One Love. But point number one is that my book on Zimbabwe starts with the concert that Marley gave in Zimbabwe just as independence was coming into being in April 1980. And as you know, just before Walter Rodney was assassinated, a few months later, in June 1980, I happened to be in Guyana as a legal observer for his trial and conferred with the defense. And when I left, I was confident they were going to be acquitted, but alas, at least Rodney did not have that opportunity as he was slain. But once again, an analysis of One Love.
You wanted to go first, Melinda?
Yes. I also want to wish you a happy birthday. That's the reason why I went to see the movie. And I mean, I thought the score was great. It's kind of hard to not have a good score. And I loved the actors. They kind of made the screenplay a little engaging. So overall, it was what I expected. It was a love story between the relationship between Rita and Bob, and then I thought the inner workings of Bob's creations would have been more engaging, but overall I didn't hate it.
Okay.
That's my analysis.
All right.
But it was like what I expected. Yeah. So I would love to hear Norman's take.
I think it was I'd say, first of all, I think the acting in the soundtrack was, I give it a 10. I think that I have a soft spot for the this brother was born in Trinidadian background. He was born, the guy who played Bob was born in England. What is it? Kentish. I'm related to the Kentishes, so I think this is the part of England he was from, was the Kentish town or something in England, and he played Malcolm X in the Sam. It was a movie about Sam Cooke, Jim Brown, and he played that. And I have a real soft spot for him. And the woman that played Rita, she captured Rita. I don't really think she hasn't lived in Jamaica either, but I think she pulled it off. However, the problem I had with the film, it was One Love, One Heart. That the One Love song was about stopping the gang warfare or the street organization warfare in Kingston. It had nothing to do with when the imperialists have taken it and they've made One Love to mean Bob loves love everybody. The baker, the butcher, no class analysis at all, or no kind of analysis. You just One Love, you love everybody, and that was not the intention of that particular song when it was made. But it is the intention of the corporations are trying to sell tickets to a movie, and the whole question of it being released on Valentine's Day. They are talking about. It's very controversial because Bob was he liked his women, and Rita played the field as well. And I've heard a lot of people, they're more critical of Rita than they are of Bob because, being a woman, she was supposed to stick by Bob under all circumstances. I've heard that was one of the criticisms that I hear. That Rita was she had she was playing around on Bob, blah 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 blah. But I think it was just a watered down Hollywood film as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, I see.
Well, and it would have been interesting if they didn't cut the Tosh scene, because I heard that didn't make the final cut. The actor spoke about it, so that was interesting cut.
What in
and
terms of the soundtrack, did they include Zimbabwe or war?
Yeah,
yes.
They did. They did. It basically, the soundtrack is the creation of Exodus, that album that he recorded. So,
but they sound like I'm sorry for cutting you, Belinda. Let me
no,
shut up.
I mean that was the soundtrack basically. Yeah, so they included war. They included
But it sounded like they were alternative takes. It's not the same thing that you hear on the records that you have at home or the albums that you have at home. It sounds like they are alternate. Which I thought I enjoyed it because I enjoyed the music. Period. They had scenes in there with Junior Marvin. Junior Marvin was the guitar player, and Junior Marvin was Donald Kinsey played with Bob for a minute. Donald Kinsey is from Gary, Indiana, and Donald Kinsey's father taught Jermaine Jackson how to play. Jermaine or Tito, he worked with them. But they showed Junior Marvin, and Junior Marvin. If you ever saw the Wailers live, Bob almost had to fight with him because he would be carrying on so much on stage, and he was a very charismatic brother, and he was real. The role he played was real funny because he had his hair. I don't know how he had his hair, but he fell in. He was supposed to go with Stevie Wonder, but he turned Stevie Wonder down and actually went with Bob. And he's still playing today. As you know, there's 3, 4, 5 different Wailer bands. I think Al Anderson is a brother from New Jersey. He has a set of Wailers, and then Family Man, who just passed away. Family Man had a set. And I guess it's like the whole, as you know, knowing as much as music as you know, if you have a name, you got about 50 drifters out there. You got Temptations Review led by Damon Harris, Temptations Review led by Dennis Edwards. So it's the same thing with the reggae music is going the same way.
I see.
The same way. But I would, and I definitely want to go see it again. One thing that's interesting is Bob. When Bob is realized that he has cancer, there's a scene of him reading John Hendricks Clark's book. I forgot what is Dr. Clark's book on Marcus Garvey. I'm looking at I can't see it right now. I mean, I can't read it right now, but it's one of Dr. Clark's book it's an anthology with all the essays about Marcus Garvey by Dr. Clark. I hope. I guess that's going to probably get a lot of people wanting to pick up that book. It is a great book because it's an anthology with a lot of different writers talking about, Garvey's thoughts.
I see.
And when are you going to see it?
Oh, I'm not really sure. I doubt if I'll see it in the theaters, particularly in light of the tepid reviews on Diasporic music.
I guess we're not on the promotions team. So do we want to go on to Gaza?
Well, just briefly, because I know time is expiring. The latest news is a split in the Israeli leadership. The number two, Benny Gantz, showed up in Washington to the consternation of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Vice President Harris called for a ceasefire. The movement is accelerating here in the United States. There's a regular protest now at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. So things are moving along. And once again, it's causing severe reputational damage to the imperialist countries, which of course is having knock-on effects with regard to how, as noted, they're approaching Southern Africa.
Now, I guess with that, we will see you in the whirlwind, sir. And is there any? Oh, you already talked about the Zimbabwe thing. Is there any other announcements you wanted to make?
No, that's about it. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. And I'd like to thank Lisa Watson for keeping us on par. And Melinda Francis, you have anything else to add?
See everybody in the whirlwind next week. Stay safe.
Right. The whirlwind, and we will be back next week.